All right, as Aubrey said, I'm one of the doc students working with Dr. Stahl and working with Aubrey. So I have a research project that I'd love you all to help me with, if you can, to be my participants in it. I know she's mentioned a little bit about what that is. But basically I want to look at the aesthetic, social, and moral meaning that athletes might have with their uniforms. We'll talk about what that means exactly, and that's why I'm doing this presentation, because it's kind of like, what are you talking about, right? But basically what that'll entail is you'll do quiz A, quiz B, and your musing. Aubrey's already talked about those. They are required for your class, but you don't have to participate in the study if you don't want to. Okay, so I'll give out the consent forms. The consent forms basically say that I can use your information for the study, but I won't share your information with anybody but the research team. And any identifying information like your name, will remove that so that you can't be identified with it, okay? So if you'll participate, I would be very gracious. If not, that's totally fine, okay? So I just wanted to start a little bit by talking about this term aesthetic or sport aesthetic and what I mean by that. If you hear that term, what do you first think of? Aesthetic. Yes, exactly. It's something that we like to look at. You hear people say sometimes, this is very aesthetically pleasing, right? So we like to look at it. So that's usually how it's described and defined. Even some sports, so like gymnastics and figure skating, they actually use that definition for judging that sport, right? The figure skater goes out there and does something and it has to look a certain way, be performed a certain way, same with the gymnast, and they get graded or judged for that and get points for that. But in other sports and in a different aspect of this, I want you to think more of sport aesthetic as the sensuous or qualitative aspects. And what the heck am I talking about there? When we talk about sensuous, any idea? About your senses. So the way you see it, the way you hear it, the way you smell, all those sorts of things are being involved, okay? Qualitative, what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative?
Quantitative is like how much of something there is, and qualitative is like how good it is sometimes.
Okay, so quantitative, we're counting things, right? We actually get hard data. So how many points did you score? How good was your team? How many wins did they have? That sort of thing. When we talk about qualitative, I want to know what your actual experience was on that team. So it's more a rich data of you telling me words versus gathering a whole bunch of numbers and statistics, okay? Another way to think about it is, we talked about aesthetic meaning beauty. So think about it as the beauty of having experienced the sport. So what was your experience? What was it like to be in that sport? What was beautiful about that? Okay? You kind of get where I'm going with this? And we could also call it the subjective versus the objective. So again, subjective, what you experienced. Objective would be those numbers and those stats that we're keeping. Okay? Let's go a little bit further. So tell me what you see in this picture. Just right off the bat. What is this picture of?
Soccer team.
Soccer team. It's actually volleyball.
Oh.
But it's okay, the uniforms look like soccer uniforms. It's okay. Anything else?
The first thing I noticed was the jerseys, how the jerseys looked.
Okay. So you picked soccer because of the uniforms too, right?
Yes.
Right? And then you pick out the jerseys. I mean, everybody's in uniform, everybody's the same. And you said it was older, which kind of makes me feel old because I'm this one right here.
Oh no.
But that's okay. I'm a bit older than you all. So this is a picture of my 8th grade volleyball team. And let me tell you what I see in this picture. I see in this picture my first chance to be a Bobcat. This is the first Bobcat uniform I got to wear. So that was our school mascot, right? So this is the first time I got to be part of that team. I belonged to this team. I was part of this tribe. It was the first time I was accepted into that. The other thing I see on this is bright red forearms that sting from hitting so many balls over and over. Alex, you know what I'm talking about, right? You play volleyball. Especially for these 8th graders. I mean, this is the first time most of us have played competitive volleyball. So your arms get really sore. I can almost still feel the sting, just imagining it, right? I also think of just the uniform in general and how important that was. Part of that uniform were knee pads that we got. Anybody wear knee pads? Well, any of you that wore any sort of pad or protective gear in any sport, you'll know what I'm talking about here. You had to put it on a very specific way. They had to be in the exact same spot every time. And then when you took them off, they stunk to high heaven. But they were so important to me, right? And I actually had those knee pads until last year. So I had them for like 20 years. I finally got rid of them because they were worthless, really. But I used them all through high school, all through my volleyball. Okay. The other thing I see from this is my first experience actually executing the perfect spike. Again, we're 8th graders. We're really just learning this game. But at the end of the season, it finally just clicked. This is our setter here, and she finally just gave me this beautiful set. I don't remember who passed the ball, but beautiful set, and it just worked. And I hit the ball, and we both just looked at each other and was like, it worked, right? And it just felt amazing to do that. I can remember how that felt. So why is it that I know, or I think about so much more from this picture than you guys did? You guys saw some uniforms, and I just gave you a whole lecture on everything that I saw in there. I mean, obviously, I was the one there, right? I was the one that experienced it. So that's what I'm talking about here. You might look in and say, and you could say, oh, this team is aesthetically pleasing. Everything's uniform. They're not all, they're pretty good looking girls, right? We're only 14, so it's okay. Everybody's in the awkward stage. But for me, the aesthetic experience goes much deeper than that. And that's what I want you guys to try and think about in this musing that you're going to do for us, okay? One of the other things to keep in mind is you might think, oh, you're just going down memory lane here. I'm looking at a picture and thinking about all my time playing volleyball and that sort of stuff. But as Wharton, who was one of our doc students many years ago as well, he said, it's more than just an emotional retreat into one's sport nostalgia days. It's what genuinely lies within. And it's really hard to describe what that is. But if you've played sport and you loved it, you should know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to think about it, but I think you know what I'm talking about here. One of the things that contributes to this aesthetic experience can be that sensuous aspect of things. Okay, so like the sights, the sounds, the smell, the touch, all these senses that we have with it. Also objects. I already talked about the uniform and my knee pads and things like that. Even just certain movements that you made, they can tie you and contribute to that aesthetic experience, okay? So, for example, how many of you play basketball in here, okay? What's the sound of the ball going through the net?
Swish.
Is it a cool sound?
Yeah.
It's a pretty amazing sound. Even if you're a fan of basketball at all, you know what we're talking about, right? That's a pretty predominant sound. What about squeaky shoes on a polished floor? Yeah, I see a couple of you nodding. Anywhere else that something squeaks, that's usually a bad thing, right? You're like, I need to oil something up, I need to fix something because squeaking is bad, but that sound of squeaky shoes on the floor is just like amazing. And what does it do? It reminds you of that experience that you had. So Aubrey, what's your object that connects you?
My object is a soccer ball. So I love how the soccer ball hits on the foot. I've always loved soccer ball, so it draws me back to the experience every time I see a soccer ball. So if you're in Walmart and you see me in the activity aisle, I'm probably looking at soccer balls because it's drawing me back into the experience.
You just can't help it, huh?
I can't. I'm like, ooh, that one's red. I like that one.
That's awesome. I believe that Aubrey's talked about Dr. Stahl in here. She's our major professor, obviously, and has a lot of say in structuring this class and whatnot. She gives an experience of showing up at the military academy where she did some work, and they had an ice rink, and she was like, can I just go out on the ice rink? She was a figure skater, and they're like, yeah, you can go out there. And she just went out there and just started smelling. She's like, the ice has a smell that is just so important to her. And then I think she even said she laid down on the ice and was like, she kissed it even.
She kissed it.
Ugh. Okay, that might be a little bit too far. But there's something about that, the smell of the ice, being in there, maybe even your home court, your home gym, that sort of a thing. They can all contribute to this aesthetic experience. And a lot of times we don't think about it until after the fact, right? So actually, what about you guys? Is there something, one of these things that actually ties you back to your sport, or that you've realized now is kind of an important piece to it? Anybody want to share?
Mine would be touch for sure, like you mentioned volleyball, and you pass it, I just like, I can just feel it every time.
You can tell when it's a good one, huh?
Yeah.
And it's just like,
It just feels so right, you're like,
yep. Awesome. Anybody else?
Smell of chalk. I was a gymnast.
Okay.
And like I smell chalk and I'm like, I had nightmares, like bars. And I'm like, oh my goodness, but
So it takes you back, maybe not in a good way, but maybe in a good
well,
way
in a
too.
good way,
Okay.
yeah. I just, yeah.
Anybody else?
I run track, and whenever I hear like the gun go off, whether I'm just watching or like running, it like gives me like a boost of adrenaline.
Yep. You're ready to go. It's like Pavlov's dog, right? You're ready to do something when you hear that. Awesome. One of the things that is a theory, I guess, that Dr. Stahl, Aubrey talks about this as well, and myself really believe is that there's something really important about this aesthetic piece. And other philosophers have talked about it as well. The challenge is it's kind of difficult to talk about it. Like Alex, you said, I mean, it just feels so right. But what is that? What is that? That's about as far as we can describe, right? Because it's this bodily knowing that we have. Your body's experiencing it and your body doesn't really talk, right? So it's a little bit hard to actually give words to this, so it's a little bit challenging to talk about it. But I think there's something that lies in here in that it could be a really strong motivator that ties you back to that sport. It could be one of those things. So why do you do sport? Because it's fun? Well, tell me what fun is. What is fun about it? Well, it might be fun about it that you actually have that gun and you're just ready to go. It goes off, boom. And that's part of the fun. You know, these other experiences that you have with it might be a pretty strong motivator to connect you to this experience. So just kind of a theory that we think. So going back to my research, the topic that I want you to think about most critically for this is sport uniforms. And I think those uniforms can be part of that aesthetic experience. But I mean, in general, what do we have these uniforms for? Why do we wear them? Yeah.
identification.
Identification. We need to know who's on this team and who's on this team, both for the referees and for the players. You ever played a game, nobody had jerseys on, and you passed it to the wrong team? Done that a lot of times, right? When playing a pickup game or something like that. Okay? Definitely it gives us that identification. Anything else? How many of you wore pads or helmets or anything like that? Hopefully they're doing some sort of protection to you as well, right? So it can be a protective thing. It can also identify you as part of a certain group and things like that, and that can contribute to that aesthetic experience, okay? And that's what I really want to focus in on is, can it be a connection to that aesthetic experience, your uniform, all right? So think for a second, can you remember your very first sport uniform? It took me a little while to remember what it was, or at least one of the first ones. Does anybody remember? Okay, what was it and how old were you?
I was 6 years old, and it was my first year playing fast pitch, and we had these all black uniforms. Even the numbers were like a matte black, and they were horrible. And my parents would take us to the supermarket, and everyone would think that me and my sister were playing soccer, and it would make me so mad because we weren't in soccer in fast pitch.
So were they shorts and t-shirts, so they looked
Yeah.
like soccer uniforms?
Yeah, but we were only 6, so everything was like
Right.
nasty cotton, and
Right.
it was gross. I didn't like them.
Okay, so you didn't like them because of probably because people got you confused.
Yes.
A lot of it. Okay, you were not in your head. What was it? And how old?
I was like 5 years old. It was Boys and Girls Club Soccer T-shirt, and our whole team looked like a bunch of ragtag little kids playing soccer.
Usually you're like this big and the shirts come down to here, right? And you're all running around and tripping and following the ball wherever it goes. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so if you can remember that uniform, can you remember, you already talked a little bit about how it fit. It didn't fit very well. And you didn't like the way it felt because of the cotton or whatever, though. But even, maybe not necessarily your first uniform, but can you remember other uniforms that you might have had? And can you remember how they felt? And can you remember how they smelled, even? Basketball jersey, polyester, it has a distinct smell when it's been sitting in the closet. You take it out, It's like, oh, yep, that's the basketball jersey. Of course, it has a distinct smell after the game also, right? As you sweated in it and whatnot. And can you remember those things about your uniform? Did you ever wear your uniform outside of sport? So you talked about going to the store and having it on, but did anybody else wear it maybe purposefully outside the sport that you can think of? Somebody mentioned in the last class wearing their uniform on game day. So they'd wear their top jersey, so a couple of you are nodding at that. So you'd wear it to school. I mean, what was that like? Why did you do that? Was it special for some reason?
For us, it was just like everyone at school that was on the team would wear it, and it was
Mhm.
just like promote the game kind of to get like people to come watch.
Mm-hmm. So hey, we have a game today. Did you feel like it kind of set you apart as somebody? Yeah, so it's like you're identified with this group in that, right? Yeah. So a lot of things that our uniforms can do to us, and maybe or maybe not, they were somehow special to you. I had a whole bunch of uniform, mostly like t-shirts and jerseys and stuff from basketball, volleyball, that sort of thing. And once I graduated, I was wearing them and I was noticing they were getting a little wore out, and I decided to memorialize them, I guess. So I don't want to really throw them away, but I don't really know what to do with them. I don't really want them to get wore out, and so the vast majority of them, I made them into a blanket, and I still have that blanket. And so I've got all these squares with all my jerseys on it. So they were important enough to me that I didn't want to just throw them out, but I also didn't want to just ruin them, so I made a blanket out of them. Who knows, maybe not very many other people are like that, but.
Marcus Fennell, one of the other doctoral students who graduated a couple years ago, he has his helmet hidden away. And when he's stressed, he will go and he will put his helmet on. Because he was the Idaho football player. Okay. And it brings him back to the experience. Karen Rickle, she did her whole dissertation on the aesthetics of shoes. Okay. Our track athletes are gonna like this. She would leave her shoes by the door, and then every time she walked in, the shoes would be there, calling her back to the experience for running. So those uniforms were very special to those individuals.
Well, I think a lot of times we just don't think about it, right? But if you take a few minutes just to contemplate this, maybe the shoes actually do speak to you in a sort of way. You know, you just haven't thought about it. So this is the kind of topic that I want you to consider for your musing. Aubrey already posted that online for you. There are a couple of prompts in there of some questions you could consider. You don't have to answer those, but just whatever comes to your mind and whatever you think is the best for you. Just give an honest, qualitative response to me about what you think of those, okay? All right, so today we're going to do quiz A. And so the next aspect of those sport uniforms and what quiz A is going to ask you about is the social meaning of those sport uniforms, okay? Michael Novak was an author, wrote a book called Joy of Sports, which is if you like sports, it's actually a really good read, talking about more of these qualitative things in sport versus just stats and things like that. But he said, pulling on a uniform of a team one admires is a ritual of election. One has been accepted. And even admires here, I would say a team one belongs to, could also replace admires there. But you get that jersey, and that's like, this is your ritual of election, right? I'm giving you this jersey, you have been chosen, and now you're accepted onto this team. I already talked about my uniform from the 8th grade volleyball. That's definitely how that was for me. It was so important that I finally got that stupid t-shirt that was cotton, not very nice to play in, right? But it was so important because I was then a Bobcat, I was then a volleyball player. I then belonged to that, okay? Does that make sense? What he's talking about there. So that's what quiz A will ask you about, and I'll hand those out as well as the consent forms in just a second here. When you come back from break, so the Wednesday following break, Aubrey will give you quiz B, and quiz B is going to talk about and ask you to think about the moral meaning of your sport uniforms or some connection here. Okay, let me give you an example to hopefully illustrate what I'm talking about here. So again, going back to this team, that's why the picture's up. One of our first practices, we were doing a drill where we had to just serve overhand And as soon as you got 5 serves in, you went and stood on the side. I think it was a way for our coach to assess where we were at. You know, serving overhand, we've never played competitive volleyball. Most of us could do like 1 and get it over, right? And get it in. Well, Jen was really good. She could get it over and in. I was strong enough I could get it over, not usually in very well. But we're doing this drill, and I really wanted to be like Jen. I really wanted to be one of the top players on the team. So I'm like, I'm just going to follow Jen. So Jen serves, I serve. Jen serves, I serve. We go through our 5, and then I thought, I'll just do 1 more for good measure, serve 1 more. And then we went over and stood on the side. After everybody got done, our coach pulls us in, and she says, one of you lied about how many serves you got in. And immediately, you know, my heart sank. I was like, oh shoot, that was me. I didn't think she was watching. Honestly, it was 8th grade, it was a long time ago. I can't really remember everything that was going through, but I remember what she said afterwards. She said, you all have been selected to be a Bobcat on this team, and Bobcats don't lie. Your honesty, your integrity on this sport is much more important, or on this team is much more important than how many serves you get over. That's what Bobcats are. And from that day on, playing for the Bobcats, I never lied, I never cheated. That lesson really stuck with me very heavily of, if I want to be part of this team, I have standards that I have to meet up to, okay? So that's kind of what we mean with moral meaning. Of course, that could be maybe the meaning or the standard that you had on your team was that you annihilate opponents. You go and take them out. I know there's plenty of football teams. That's kind of what's going on behind the scenes, right? We're going to kill these guys. Go take out number 10 or whoever it might be. Maybe that contributed to the moral character or moral atmosphere that was available on your team, okay? So that's kind of what we're talking about here. That will be next Wednesday when you come back. Any questions? Make sense a little bit, hopefully? Okay, I'm going to hand out the consent form and the quiz about the social meaning. And again, you don't have to do I'm just going to close that.